Hello YouTube, this is Tessin. I know it's been quite a while since I was back the last time. So basically I have been doing so much. I started my nonprofit, which is Bridge and Anchor Mental Health Services, and we're of course located in the metropolitan area, and we seek to help persons who are suffering from mental illness and the family members of those who also suffer with them. Because as I've said before, mental illness affects not only the individual but the persons in their life as well. So we work to do intake services and connective services to psychiatric evaluations. We do groups. We also allow people to come in for workshops so they can learn more about mental illness, what it is and how it may affect them, and different mechanisms to help them cope as they navigate their way through the process. So yeah, I'm very excited about that. If you have questions, please feel free to hit me up, and you can also find more information in the inbox. So yeah, basically today I wanted to talk to you guys about schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, bipolar, you name it, any mental illness, and the aspect of the diagnosis and what happens after a person started their meds and things are going good and then they go bad. So basically I remember when I first started working, not just in the health field, but in my personal experience with my family member who suffered severely. He was doing so well when we find the correct combination of medications, and then he was doing great. He wasn't having the flare-ups, he wasn't doing outbursts, and he wasn't fighting things that weren't there, and things are just good. And what happens is when a person starts to acclimate to the medications and they start to have an effect that you can notice, a visible, a visually noticeable effect. Excuse me for that, guys. You start to get excited, and sometimes we can forget that the person has a mental illness. Now, I know you don't just all of a sudden magically think, boom, it's gone. But what happens is, as human beings, as we normally deal with day-to-day routine and a person, and they give us a normal set of behaviors that are constant, we tend to forget the past behaviors, or we no longer observe them to a point where they're not in the forefront of our psyche. So what happens is we can disregard the fact and the underlying issue that they really do still have, because we're constantly being given this face of improvement. And I learned the hard way of how not to do that and why not to do that. And what happened was, with my brother, he was being treated and he was doing well, and I totally was excited, and I was taking him out to the movies. We were, going out to eat, and he would still have his moments where he would mumble to himself and kind of look off sideways, but it was never that bad. And what happened was, I was like, oh, he's healed, he's better. And what happened was, when we were out one day, I forgot to acknowledge the triggers. And I always talk when I do groups, understanding your loved one's triggers. What are the things that set them off or that can bring up a flare-up? And I totally disregarded it, and it was like night and day. And I was like, did I forget to give him his dose? Does he have enough? Is it not working? The person you're dealing with is still mentally ill. They still are dealing with a mental illness that is affecting them on every aspect of life, in every aspect of life. So you have to understand and be sensitive to that, and just know that it's never going to completely go away. It can get better, and it will. But everyone's different. Some people's success are more noticeable than others. Some have spurts, and some are just more consistent. And when you have a moment where they just seem to step back, or they seem to, everything goes so well and then it just goes, you can't allow yourself to break. And that's what I did. So we were in a Wendy's, and basically one of his triggers was set off. He does not like people walking behind him, really. And there was a huge line behind him. I wasn't even thinking about it. And the line was behind him, and we were sitting kind of like I was facing the cashier, and his back was, of course, to the queue. Well, what happened was, out of nowhere, the queue got really, really long, and so a lot of voices accumulated, a lot of movement, the room got louder, and I started to notice him, you know, while he was eating, and I was like, okay, he's just he does that. But then after a while, like about 2-3 minutes, he was totally flaring up. I mean, he was responding to internal stimuli. He was angry and very aggressive. He got up and threw his food on the floor and pointed to someone that was not there, of course, and was arguing and threatening them. Then he turned to people and started going, you know, total cray on them, and it was horrific. You think, what the H? Like, what is going on? And I had to get him out of there. I left my food and everything, and I say, hey, just come onto the car, and you know, we're done here, we're gonna go get something else. You know, in those situations, I will tell you, whenever your loved one is having a flare-up, don't lose control. It doesn't always get back under your control the way you want it, or maybe not as fast. It might take a few minutes or maybe an hour. But stay calm, keep taking breaths, and stay present with that person. If you need to, in DC, or you can call CPEP, or find your emergency psychiatric extraction services in your state that will come and take a person who is having a mental flare-up and sedate them and assess them, and have a psychiatrist make sure that they're okay, either to be released again, or in some cases, you know, to be transferred to a psychiatric mental facility if needed. It's not your fault that they are having a flare-up. You didn't do anything wrong. They didn't do anything wrong. It is just this organic mental illness taking effect and having an effect on them. Excuse me. I'm getting crazy calls today. Oh, it's actually my mum. So don't blame yourselves. Don't get discouraged when you're lying there in bed at night and he's just cursed you out for no reason. You asked him if he was hungry and you made this dinner and he just walks out. Don't be upset. It's a part of the illness. It truly is. And they'll come back and be like, hey, you cooked? And you're sitting there like this. I don't want to give you nothing. But you just understand, have understanding and patience. And then it's okay to talk to them. And I'll talk about that in another video. How to address the issues that really bother you to a person with a mental illness. Because this is huge misconception and false, understanding that, oh, you can't say that to them. You just have to deal with it. No, you don't. They are real people just like you and I. Only there is not a psychological impairment that is taking place inside of this human being that does not allow them to operate the same exact way you and I do, and within parameters as well, So we have to be understanding about that, and we have to be brave and open, and think about your questions, think about your approach. Find the best time where they're the most comfortable and very, very happy with you. Like when you guys are really having a great time. Don't just shoot it in there and make them mad, but just sort of bring it up and start it out with acknowledgement. Hey, I'm so proud of you. You've been doing so great, and this is just so good. I'm happy to be here with you. Of course, they'll be like, oh, okay, me too. And make sure you're at home, by the way. Never be out in public and tell someone their flaws. I don't care if they have a mental disability or not. It's always better to do it in home. There's less risk of them feeling embarrassed, overwhelmed, like someone's listening, especially someone who has any type of a paranoia or anxiety disorder. It's better to do it at home. It's more safe and it's isolated. So when you let them know, tell them in a suggestive way, and I'm going off subject, but tell them in a way where it's like, I was just thinking sometimes when you say this, it makes me feel this way, and I know you don't really feel that way. So is there something you would like me to do when you do that? And of course, they might either will acknowledge you or not know or they might not know it's happening and go, what are you talking about? But when that happens, they're still hearing you. right? So it does register to their mind, and it goes somewhere. And it helps you, because you got to remember, you got to take care of yourself mentally as well before you can care for someone else. So there are healthy ways to express yourself and to vent and to address issues with someone who has a mental illness, okay? Back to the point. I got him into the car, we were in the Wendy's, he flared up, I had to leave the food, and then I had to be, again, suggestive. Being suggestive is one of the biggest tools that you can use with someone who's mentally ill. Not being direct, not being accusatory or condescending. That's a big no-no, especially for paranoid schizophrenics or persons dealing with bipolar disorder. It's just any person in general. No one wants to have a condescending tone when being approached. So when we left and we got in the car, the first thing I wanted to do was reach in my bag and like find some Haldol, but I couldn't do that. He'd already had his dose for the morning. So we got in the car, and the first thing I said was, "Hey, it's okay." The first thing you can do when someone has a mental flare-up, or a flare-up, from a mental disorder or disability, is get them in an isolated space where they feel safe, right? Where the eyes aren't on them, offer them an escape from it. If they're acting out in the mall or the movies or dinner or the barber shop, forget everything that's going on around them and where you are, and say, "Hey, you know what? Don't worry about it. Let's just go and get something to eat, or let's just leave here for a second. We're fine. It's okay." Reassuring them gives them a safe exit. Because when they don't have a safe exit, they feel like they have to fight their way out sometimes, right? Or they feel like they need to be combative in order to get out of the situation, because at that point there's so much mania taking place, right? So in order to combat that, be suggestive and be calm, and show them by going out the exit and welcoming them. And then when you get them isolated, tell them it's okay, say, "Hey, let's just go and do this. Let's go get something. Let's go to a drive-thru and get something to eat. Or let's just get back to the house, and do you want, to pick up ice cream on the way?" Reassure them that they're safe with you. The best place for a person who has a mental illness to be is with someone they know is safe. They won't hurt yourself, and they will not hurt others. When they feel like they can trust you to help them get out of that moment and out of that environment where they are exposed and vulnerable, okay? And again, when you get to that point where it's all said and done, you're exhausted and you're tired. You might want to cry. You might be hurt. I mean, it's terrible to have someone go through so much and have healed so much, right, and be doing so much better, and then to go back like 50 yards or take 80 steps back and feel like you're back at, square one, or you're back at, ground zero. It's totally depressing, and I've been there so many times, but it's going to happen. It doesn't have to be bad every time. It could just be little spurts, and you can go, a little hiccup, a little speed bump, and what you'll find is, as long as they're being medicated, they normally get right back up to where they were within a few days. I had someone write me and say, "Well, my brother was having a moment," and I was like, "Okay, well, what happened?" And he was like, "Well, we were playing basketball, and all of a sudden something happened, and he threw the basketball into one of the guys' faces. They wanted to jump him, and in his mind, he started to believe, I guess, that he was this ultra being, and he started making these weird noises, and he said, I realized that he was literally trying to morph in his mind. He thought he was turning into some sort of a super being, to fight them." And, the people were, of course, looking at him like still wanting to fight him, beat him up, and they were like, "What's going on?" And, he was just terrible for him. And, he sat up all night feeling like, just depressed, and I lost my brother, and, of course I spoke with him, and I gave him some advice on what to do and some other pointers. And then I had another young lady write me, and she had told me that her husband, they were at church, and people got the Holy Ghost, right? And got excited, and were starting to worship, loud. This was a Baptist church, so their way of showing praise is by, Holy Ghost and, So basically, her husband responded to everyone's emotional excitement as a threat. And he took off his shoes, and he started to swing them at people who were jumping, you know, thinking that something was wrong with them. I guess he thought that they were trying to attack him, and she was so beside herself. She didn't know what to do. You know, she thought that, you know, the pastor, of course, who seemed to be a nice guy, said, you know, it's okay. We know something. You know, you told us he has a mental illness. You know, they asked her if they could give him preferred seating so that he's in a place where it's isolated if it happens again, which was great. But she just was so depressed and so sad. You know, she told me she hadn't eaten in 2 days because she didn't know what to do, if she could take him out in public again. And I just had to tell her, you know, honey, he has a mental illness. This is going to happen. This is not something that you give him a pill and it's gone. This is not after a conversation. He totally understands everything. And not to say if you talk to them they won't understand, but you have to understand there's still a disorder going on mentally in the mind, and it needs time, patience, it needs a care directive, and a multidisciplinary team effort to allow for the process to be successful. And you're a part of that process. And you got to take care of yourself first, as I always say, and you've got to give yourself credit. And you can't break down when they have a flare-up. I don't care how bad it gets, if they break dishes, if they say they hate you, if they get in your face, if they cheat on you, if you're in a relationship. Now that is another thing that I have to talk about in another video, because when I touched on it a few videos ago, but when someone is in a relationship with you who has a mental disorder, sometimes the parameters, the boundaries of what's right and wrong they fade, or they become very light, you know, and you know, how to communicate and get through to that person, what is emotionally acceptable for you without being condescending and causing them to feel like they need to become irate, how to keep your sanity, you know, so there are things that we talk about when I do those workshops for individuals who suffer with a loved one who is actually their mate or husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, and how to deal with it. So giving yourself credit is important. Don't fall apart. It's okay if you want to go into the bathroom and cry. I've done it many times. And you cry, you go and have some Ben and Jerry's, or you go, whatever you may drink, you know, water, and give yourself some time and say, okay, this happened. It did happen. She did act out in church. He did act out in the middle of Safeway. We were in 7-Eleven and he did this, or we were in the middle of a concert and this took place. He did say this to me and I can't believe he said that, and he doesn't mean it, but it hurts me so deeply. Just affirm within yourself that you are going to recognize that these things are happening and that it's not your fault, okay? And then you have to get back in there. It's hard to do, and it takes time to learn how to strengthen and gird yourself up. But it's very possible with the right tools and support team. Find groups. Talk to people. Talk to people who are going through the same thing by looking it up online, or contact Bridge and Anchor. We're here to give you some references and some education as well if you need it. And also connections as well. Find a person who you can trust, even if they're not going through it, who you can just vent to. Sometimes we do a lot of volcanoing and no venting. I have something that I teach in one of my groups called Venting versus Volcano. You know, a volcano is a one-way system, and it's violent, it's aggressive, and it's fast, and it's destructive. That's how we can get sometimes, and that's how a person in a flare-up can get, like a volcano. It all comes out, and they can't let anything back in. So instead of being a vent, they're a volcano. And what happens is we become volcanoes instead of staying vents. We have to remain a vent, because a vent can be a two-way system. You can receive and you can put out. And that's the only way you're going to be able to help anyone, whether it's your loved one, or if you're a psychiatric nurse, a psychiatrist, a counselor, a social worker, anything, right? Okay? It's the only way to reach them is to be in control of your two-way system and have it be healthy. You know, make sure you're cleaning it out just like any other vent. You can't be full of stuff and then deal with their stuff. You know, take time for yourself, and again, give credit. Acknowledge when something has happened. Don't fall apart. Don't fall apart. Allow yourself to cry if you need to. If you get upset, if you get angry, that's natural. Don't take it out on them. It can push them further into the negative state that they may have flared into, right? If you're having a loved one that's done something terrible and it's totally against you. I mean, I've spoken to people who said their son brought in a prostitute into their house. You know, I've had wives say their husband brought a prostitute into their bedroom. I mean, paranoid schizophrenic. I mean, and they're just like, well, you weren't home. The husband told you, well, you weren't home, and I called your phone and you weren't answering, so I was just going to have sex with her real quick, and then that was going to be it. That was their logic, right? And, of course, she got upset, and she started cursing him out, and then it got really bad, right? Because then internal stimuli kick in, they're already emotionally aggressive, they're feeling like they're being attacked, and logic, the parameters of logic are not there to sustain their thought, right? So they're acting off of emotion, right? And we can't do that. We have to be in control, right? So there are a lot of things that will happen with a person who has a mental illness. They're going to make a lot of mistakes. Yeah, of course, absolutely. You got to remember they're not all the way here all the time. Cherish the moments when they are. Don't be deceived, because you'll end up depressed when they're having this great day or great week or great month, and then out of nowhere they just have a terrible moment, and just it's all topsy-turvy. Things get destroyed and you get called names, and it just goes terrible, and you fall apart because you're loving them so much and wanting them to be healed, that when it starts to show itself, you embrace it. But we forget that something is still mentally disengaged and not altogether right with the one we care for. So stay real with yourself. Stay real with what's going on. Be good to yourself. And don't allow yourself to fall apart.
It's 2:30.
Use the mechanisms that are there. I'll talk more about those mechanisms in another video. You know, like I said, giving a person a safe exit. Being a part of that safe exit by allowing them to know that it's okay. It's alright. I don't care that you dropped that plate. I don't care that you threw that shoe. I don't care that you just cursed that man out. Even though we do, and we're like, what are you doing? But they just need to see someone on their side. Remember, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in here, saying all sorts of stuff to them, and then they got the outside world going, what are you doing? So it's a lot of voices. You be that calm voice for that moment. Push your feelings to the side. You gotta do it, because if you don't do it, you become one of the distractions, and they're gonna want to battle and get away from you as well. Okay, that's how you win. So take that into consideration. I hope this helps. Again, because I've had so many questions asking, so, oh my gosh, you know, my brother, my wife, my cousin, my son, my friend, my aunt had a terrible day or a terrible moment, and they just totally flared up out of nowhere, and they've been taking meds forever. What do I do? The meds aren't working. Yeah, the meds work just fine. You have a person who has a mental illness, and sometimes those synapses are going to just fire up on their own a little too fast, and they're going to catch each other before the meds can meet them, or reach them, excuse me. And sometimes the medication is not at high enough levels in the blood for whatever reason. Who knows? Human beings are very, very, very complex in our chemical makeup, right? These medications are going in there to aid us as we deal with the symptoms. Medications do not cure mental illness. They aid us and the person in having a productive life as they deal with the mental illness. The biggest aspect of mental illness and healing comes from the environment, community, family, social circle, and just support altogether. The meds help. So don't forget that, okay? And if you have questions, again, feel free to let me know. And until next time, I will see you guys, and I wish you all the best.